and we are very honored to have with us back on the show Mara Verheyden-Hilliard, who's a constitutional rights lawyer and the executive director of the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund. Mara, thank you so much for being with us here on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I guess maybe my first question is what is the basis for this decision? I mean, I saw that Justice Alito, just disgustingly tried to place this decision in the lineage of Brown v. Board of Education in terms of what they were doing. And I just thought, well, that can't be right. So what is actually going on here?
Well, and in Plessy, I mean, his whole presentation is this, weaving that somehow eviscerating women's fundamental rights to control their bodies, to control their futures, to control their lives, is in the long, proud tradition of recognition of civil rights. I mean, nobody reads that and takes that seriously, either in a layperson's read of it or in a lawyer's read of it. We know exactly what's happening, which is it's a deeply political court. It's a deeply political court that has shown its illegitimacy, and the Supreme Court rests on the consent of the governed. I mean, that's the reality. They issue rulings. We all accept the rulings to some degree, whether we agree or don't agree, because it's this concept, right, of the fundamental authority of this pillar of government. But that is a very tricky precipice. And this generation and my generation and all of those that have fought for so long, for so many years, are not going to accept this ruling. And it's that simple.
So what are the options legally speaking? I mean, we always hear like once a Supreme Court ruling has been made, that's it. That's the end of the road. It's over. There's no going back. Is that true in this case? And if so, what are other avenues with the institutions that exist in America, if any, to overturn what was just overturned?
Well, that's exactly the question, right? So the way that the court functions, and it functions in a pillar of American society as the judicial branch, is this concept, the concept that the court issues rulings. It's the final word, it's the final legal word, unless it's something that can be given a legislative outcome, in which case there can be a legislative change, and that society functions to whatever degree within the confines of those rulings. But when you decide, as this court has decided, that it's going to issue a ruling that is such a dramatic imposition on fundamental human rights and restriction or attempted restriction on human rights, you cannot expect that humanity is going to go along and agree with that. And yes, you can turn to a legislative end. The question is, will Congress pass a law that protects fundamental abortion rights? But will they? They haven't so far. The Democrats have, the House and the Senate. The Democrats have had the House and the Senate in the past under Obama. They've never done this. They haven't done it now. And equally, when things shift course, who gets to decide? This is one of those times where it's up to the people to decide. People have to make the decision collectively how we are going to govern our future and our lives.
You lead up by this decision because it does seem like this is really just the first domino, the opening shot of something bigger.
Well, Eugene, I just lost the sound there for you at the end of what you were saying. But okay, now I've got you again. With regard to Thomas's opinion, I mean, we know that this is the truth, and he's actually saying exactly what they're thinking. This court and the right-wing forces behind it and the religious forces behind this imposition on women is part of an effort to eviscerate and roll back decades of hard-fought rights that have been recognized by the court. Now, we believe those rights are ours, and the issue is a Supreme Court enshrinement and recognition of rights. And when the court is now looking at using the language it used in this opinion, which it will use and which Thomas is pointing to, as the next basis to now roll back all of these other fundamental rights that have been recognized, including marriage equality, even going way back to the recognition of the right to contraception, all of these elements in a patriarchal society that control other people's lives, they are looking at every opportunity now to take back these hard-fought rights that have been recognized by the Supreme Court. Really, you could see it coming from the labor movement in the 30s, and then the recognition of rights to protest, to the civil rights movement, and people taking to the streets and forcing these recognitions, again, of fundamental civil rights, with the marriage equality movement that just broke out and was so massive in the streets, and then a recognition of the right to marriage. And now what we're seeing is them intending to dismantle everything they can dismantle and take us back decades, and we're not going to go.
And I think that raises a good point about where we should look to for maybe inspiration or guidance at this point in time. When you talk about like the people in the streets, there wasn't always the decision for Roe v. Wade, and abortion was illegal in America at one point. And there was activism, women's organizing in the pre-Roe era to push against that. And then, of course, today, speaking of more modern times, I guess, you also have all of this activism across Latin America that has actually succeeded in gaining the right to abortion and decriminalizing abortion across so many countries in the last decade alone. So what do you think we can learn from past movements, current movements in the global South about how we in America should deal with this issue?
The court, even though it claims it's not political, is of course deeply political. And the court, not just as the individual personalities, but the American institutions, from the court to the legislative branch, they are reactive to the movement in terms of the defining nature of people, when people come together as such a power and such a force, and an immovable force that must be reckoned with. And when people in society make it clear exactly what course society will be on, that is a forward course, that is a course towards human liberation, and that they will not accept anything less, the institutions either have to follow that course because that is the course of humanity, or they render themselves illegitimate and face those outcomes. And we are at one of those incredible defining moments today with this ruling, which again, as Thomas is signaling, is just going to be the start of an effort to eviscerate hard-fought rights, but rights that no one is giving up.
I think this is such an important point, Mara, this tradition, of civil disobedience, maybe we should call it, of people standing up for what's right, sort of regardless of what the status quo ante may have been. And, I mentioned it earlier, I watched it myself. I know probably many people have seen this HBO Max documentary, Jane, about the underground abortion network in Chicago, late 60s, early 70s. Obviously many people are going to be out in the streets. And I guess I'm asking sort of a twofold piece here. On the one hand, we had Biden's, ridiculous call in his speech, saying peaceful 30 different times about whatever the protest should be, which to me didn't really read peaceful. It read muted and totally unobjectionable. And then I think we have this question of, I think many people, defying these laws. And I guess, I don't know exactly what I'm asking here, but where do you put this in this conversation around, what needs to happen now?
Well, even if we talk about this as like, what is the law? The law that ALITO is citing as like the ground on which this stands, right, is he's citing cases from like 1602 and the 1700s. And, Matthew Hale, who was this extraordinary misogynist who believed that men had the right to beat their wives because, of course, women were property. And when the court is talking about it makes this argument that there is no right for women to have access to abortion as health care under the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, because the restrictions on abortion, in their view, are not restrictions that are based on basically an effort to repress women. That it's like a neutral restriction on abortion, like that's it. Instead of recognizing, as of course the court is not going to recognize, but as we all recognize, that this is an outgrowth of patriarchy and an effort to suppress humanity, and a large portion of humanity that has gone on for hundreds and hundreds of years. But that's actually what's in this opinion. It's like, have the Taliban write your opinion. And this is what they're asking all of us to accept and consent to is, hey, like 1602, Like, that isn't going to fly with people. That isn't going to stand. So when, as you're asking, like, well, like with the Jane Collective, with the movements, with the struggle for society, and for societal change, that is what's going to happen now. I mean, people are going to be out there, and people have to be out there.
Mara,
actually, I want to
Rania.
before you ask your question, I just wanted to point out, I actually am not even sure what the Taliban's position is on abortion, but they may not actually be against it. I just wanted to throw that out there because that's the kind of thinking, like, it's like, wow, you might be worse than the Taliban on this issue. Think about that, people in the Supreme Court. Go ahead, Eugene.
I hope a lot of people.
That's a really important point.
I mean, I'm not sure, but I think that they might not have an objection to abortion. Jesus Christ.
Well, the court's view is
that lower third
is that restrictions on abortion are not a sex-based classification, right? So it's not subject to what's called heightened scrutiny, and that's actually the position that they're taking. So they dismiss out of hand any 14th Amendment equal protection claim, and then the question becomes the 14th Amendment due process claims, which is what they have overridden today. That there's any grounding there. That allows women to control their lives and other people who become pregnant to be able to control their lives. But we understand that even where this affects the LGBTQ community, that the repression of women and the repression of the LGBTQ community is grounded in patriarchy and a demand that people are controlled and fit into patriarchal roles.
Mara, you're already speaking to this, and I'm glad you brought up that 1602 piece and also Hale and others, because, I saw, maybe my fault that I was even amazed by this, but, just an amazing study the other day about, women who had been surveyed about the impact of an unplanned abortion, like, 60 some odd % were worried they'd have to stop working, they wouldn't be able to go to school, that their mental health would deteriorate. I mean, just keep talking if you could about this reality, because I think to some people it's so far from their minds, what this really means to force, at least potentially tens of millions of women in any given circumstance to carry a pregnancy to term against their will.
Well, it affects women, of course, in so many different ways. But, from the medical issues, which you were touching on earlier, and, the extraordinary level of maternal mortality in the United States, from what it does to a woman's body. I mean, if a woman chooses that she wants to be pregnant, that she wants to proceed with gestation, this is still a huge toll on a human body. But of course, for many people, it is a toll that ends in death and or extreme, medical crisis. And aside from that issue, the idea that women, which is really what's in this opinion, is that women are vessels, and that women are objects, and that's where we go back to the Matthew Hale and those bright thinkers of the 1600s and 1700s when it comes to women or anybody else. And the idea that women are objects, the idea that women are property, the idea that women are vessels, the idea that you can actually do forced gestation, which is what this is, that's telling all of these, tens of millions of women and other people in the United States can get pregnant, that, you can be subject to forced gestation. And it defuturizes people. I mean, that's ultimately what it is. It defuturizes women. It says that you don't get to go to school. You don't get to live your life. You don't get actually to have those other children that you might have had you not been forced to have children now, but then had children at another point in your life when you were ready to have children, and give them the life that they deserve as well as your own life. It's a complete destruction of a human life to force somebody to be pregnant and carry that pregnancy to term, whether or not that person is, then able to put up for adoption or whether they're forced to care for the child. It's an extraordinary destruction.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mara, I really appreciate you being willing to join us. And just real quick before we let you go, where can people find the work of the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund? Because I know you're on the front lines of many, many crucial fights.
You can follow us on Twitter at the PCJF, or come to our website, which is justiceonline.org. And please do, because we're going to have everyone's back, because we expect and will be with everyone in the streets on this.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Well, Mara, thank you so much.
Thank you.